Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Veguilla-Lezan, and if you are new here, I am a freelance graphic designer and illustrator based out of the Midwest, and I run a creative studio called Bella and Sophia Creative Studio. On this channel, you're likely to find studio vlogs as well as a load of tutorials relating to things like Affinity Designer and the Affinity software, and creative work on your iPad using apps like Procreate. In addition to my freelance work, I worked in the corporate fashion world for 10 years, and I've been a freelancer since 2009, so I've been doing this for quite a long time. In addition to all of my professional work, you can also find me teaching. I teach in fashion and marketing and business departments throughout the Chicagoland area, but my most recent work has been remotely online for an East Coast school. You can also find a bunch of my classes over on Skillshare. So today I wanted to do another fun Procreate focused tutorial. This week we're going to be talking about mirrored patterns. Surface pattern design is one of my favorite topics, something that I really enjoy doing for personal work as well as freelance work. And recently I got a comment and someone had mentioned creating mirrored repeats. And today I'm going to show the process on Procreate. We're going to talk about the different symmetry tools that you'll see, like the Radial symmetry tool and the Quadrant symmetry tool, as well as assisted drawing. And then I'm going to walk you through, once we've created our elements using those different tools, I'm going to walk you through how to create a repeat pattern in Procreate. So let's get started. Okay, so the first thing we're going to need to do is launch Procreate. What we want to do is set up a new artboard. We want to create this in the largest size we can possibly make it. I'm just going to stick with a 10 by 10 inch square. So in the upper right hand side of your Procreate app, you're going to select the little plus icon. And then we're going to select the plus inside of the rectangle for the new canvas icon. And then we're going to go down into our measurements first and change it from pixels to inches. And then we're going to update the width and the height to 10 inches by 10 inches at 300 dpi. And then depending on what you're going to load this final artwork to, say something like SPOONFLOWER, it's okay to use RGB, but if you're doing something that's a print-on-demand site, you might want to look at what their requirements are, and you may want to update your color profile to something like CMYK. But for what we're doing right now, RGB is fine, and then we can select the orange Create button. This is what our artboard is going to look like. And before we jump into actually creating the shapes and then building our repeat pattern, I want to show some features that we'll be working with. So if you go into your Reg icon and you click on it, you'll have a bunch of different actions. What we want to do is go to Canvas, and then we want to turn on our drawing guide. We're going to turn on drawing guide, which will turn on the grid that you can see on your screen, and then we want to select Edit Drawing Guide. Here you're able to update the type of drawing guide you're working with. We want to select Symmetry. And then what you'll be able to do is update the opacity, the thickness, and the color of the lines within your Symmetry options. The next thing we want to do though is look at the different options within Symmetry. So you're able to select a vertical guide like what we have now, a horizontal guide, a quadrant, which basically gives you the ability to create shapes in all 4 quadrants, and radial. So I'm going to show you each of these individually, and then we'll go into creating our shapes with the final radial. We can also adjust whether or not we want to have rotational symmetry turned on or off, and we want to make sure we have assisted drawing selected. So I'll show you what these look like as we create. So once we've done all of that, you can even go in and move the placement of this drawing guide as well, which is really great for things like perspective drawing, but we're not going to use that today. Let's start with vertical just so that we can see how this works, and then we'll move our way through each of the options. We're going to have rotational symmetry off, assisted drawing on, and then we're going to select Done. And then I'm just going to select an easy to see pencil. I'm going to select the studio pen, and what you'll notice is that whatever I draw on one side is going to show up on the other. And it just gives us this really pretty, complex design, and you're only creating on one side of the screen, which gives you, it's just a little bit easier. And then basically, because you're creating on one side of the screen, whatever you create on one side is going to show up on the other. It's like you only have to draw half of your picture. So that's how vertical works. Let's go back into our wrench icon, go down to our actions, select canvas, go back to edit drawing guide. And then what I want to do is turn on rotational symmetry really quick so you can see what it looks like once we've done that. Hit done. And then I'm just going to clear this layer by opening up my layers, dragging left, and then selecting clear. And what you'll see is with rotational symmetry, it just keeps in mind the direction of your stroke. It just kind of rotates the stroke direction depending on the side that you're working on. Now, if we turn that off, we go back into actions, go into symmetry, go into options, turn off rotational symmetry, hit done. You'll see that it just goes in the opposite direction of what we're creating in. Now let's clear this layer by clicking on it, dragging left, selecting clear, and then we're going to go back to our wrench icon. We're going to select edit drawing guide, and then we're going to go back to symmetry, and we're going to go into our options, and we're going to switch from vertical to horizontal, and then we can see what it does when we select this. So it's basing our split of the image at the horizontal line versus the vertical line. Now let's go back to our layers. We'll select our layer, drag left, and select clear. Let's go back to our wrench icon, and then let's go into edit drawing guide once more. Select the options in symmetry, select quadrant, and basically whatever you do in one quadrant will be done in all the other 3 quadrants. So hit done, and let's test this out. So whatever we put in one side will show up on all the other sides. And this does a really good job of just allowing you to create really elaborate designs and shapes and elements in a really simple manner. Alright, so let's go back up to our layer, drag left, and let's clear it. Let's go back to our wrench icon, select edit drawing guide, go back to options, and then select radial, and then hit done. And then let's see what this does. So basically it creates radial shape. So whatever, instead of just the 4 quadrants, there is 8 total quadrants within this shape starting from a center point. You can use this to create some really beautiful kind of mandalas or gorgeous floral shapes and elements, and this is going to be the option that we are going to utilize today for our project. So once we're done, we can go back into our canvas, select edit drawing guide, and we can just go in and you can revise and edit, decide on the option you want to utilize. But for the sake of this tutorial, we are going to be working within Radial, and then I'm going to hit done, and then I'm going to go back into my layer and I'm going to select clear. And what we're going to do is just begin at the center and play around with creating some floral elements. It doesn't have to be perfect. You want to have fun with it, and that's the beauty of this tool, is that it kind of makes this very complex looking shape making very easy. And as I go through, I'm just gonna kind of eyeball this, play around with the shapes, see what I like, and think about the placement of my elements. And then once I've done that and I'm happy with the main shape that I've created, what I want to do then is go into edit drawing guide, and then I'm going to go into options, and I'm going to turn off assisted drawing, and then I'm just going to go into 2D grid, hit done, and then go back into my wrench options, and then I'm going to turn my drawing guide off. This way I can add any additional elements that I don't want to be symmetrical within this shape. And then what you want to do too is just make sure when you have this element, after you've finished drawing the element, you want to go into that layer and uncheck mark assisted drawing so that you can add any additional elements on top of that layer, or you can just create a new layer and draw them on there as well. Once I'm done with this shape, I'm going to select the original layer and the new layer. I'm going to group them together, and then I'm going to make a duplicate of that group by dragging left and selecting duplicate, and then I'm going to uncheck mark my original, and then I'm going to go to that original group, and I'm just going to double tap where it says new group, and I'm going to select rename, and I'm going to rename it original so I know that it's my editable version. And then I'm going to select the new group, and I'm going to tap inside of the square, and I'm going to select flatten. And then what I want to do is create a duplicate of that one. I'm going to go to my flattened image, and I'm going to uncheck mark it just so that I have an original version just in case something happens. Go back into my layer name, and I'm going to tap where it says layer 1. I'm going to select rename it, and then I'm going to rename it flattened original. And then I'm going to go into that updated layer that we're going to be working with, and I'm going to duplicate that again by dragging left and selecting duplicate. And now what we want to do is begin to create the repeat. So we're going to take this first layer, and I'm going to select it. And what we want to make sure we do is turn on some options that I think make surface pattern repeats, creating seamless repeats in Procreate a lot easier since the update. And that's the snapping and magnetic option. So once you select your arrow move tool, you'll see these options pop up at the bottom. You want to make sure snapping is selected. You'll know it's selected because it's highlighted in blue. And if in your settings they're not turned on, you just want to tap the little toggles for magnetics and snapping and turn them on. And then you can play around with like the distance and velocity. I find that max is the best, and then you can play around with the distance based on what your needs are, but I find 19 works just fine. And then I'm just gonna tap out of that, and then I'm gonna move this up so you can see this a little bit better. And then making sure that your first layer is selected, what we want to do is we're gonna pull these off to the side, literally in half. And you'll see that it's in half because you'll have these yellow and blue lines kind of pop up, and you'll know you've pulled your first option all the way to the left, and you want it to center it to the left, centered within the middle of the original image. And then we want to do the same thing for the next layer, except we're going to be dragging it right. So we're going to make sure that layer is selected. We're going to tap on the arrow tool, and then we're gonna drag it to the right, and you want to make sure it lines up with the middle of that element, and then you want to just make sure that everything is centered to the right. Some people like to add color or like little guide marks. I find that when I have the magnetic set up, I'm able to pull it exactly where it needs to be, and I haven't had any issues. So now what we want to do essentially is fill the center area here. So we want to fill, what we want to do is create a new layer. So we'll select our layers, hit the plus icon, and then I'm just going to show you where we're going to fill before I start actually designing anything. So I'm going to take my paintbrush, and then this is the area that we want to fill with additional shapes. So I'm just going to clear this layer, and I'm going to go back into my color picker. I'm going to update the color to the black color that I was using before. Go back to my pen icon, and then I'm just going to add some elements to this center piece. So what we could do is go back in with this layer and go into our Symmetry tool and turn on the drawing guide once more. Select Edit Drawing Guide, and this time what we want to do is select Symmetry, and we're going to change our options from radial to horizontal so that whatever we put up top will go on the bottom, or vice versa. And then select, make sure assisted drawing is on, and then select done. And then we can kind of begin to fill these areas in. And then once I've filled that in, what I want to do is go back up to my layers. I'm going to go into Edit Drawing Guide, select my options, turn off Assisted Drawing, turn on my 2D grid, hit Done, and then go back into my wrench options again, and then turn off Drawing Guide. And then I'm going to group all of the additional layers that I just added. So also I'm going to make sure that Assisted is turned off with this new layer. I'm going to click on it and then uncheck mark Assisted, and then I'm going to drag right across the next layers, the next two layers, and then I'm going to select Group. And then what I want to do is duplicate this group by dragging left and then selecting Duplicate, and then renaming this group, and then I'm going to call it Original 2, and then hit Return. Go into my new group, flatten it, and then I'm going to swipe left and I'm going to duplicate that again. And then I'm going to uncheck mark my original flattened, and then I'm going to rename this Flat Original 2. And then select Return. And then I'm going to go into the new layer that I created, and we're going to basically pull these layers to the top and the bottom. So just like what we did before, we pulled the layers to the left and the right. We're now creating the top portion of the repeat. So I'm going to take that new layer and I'm going to duplicate it. And then what I'm going to do is select that first duplicated option, select my arrow move tool, make sure snapping is turned on. And then we want to make sure all of our originals are turned off. And then we're going to select that first layer that we copied, and we're going to select our arrow move tool. And just like what we did before, we were dragging left and right. This time we're dragging up and down. So we want to take that new layer here and we're going to drag it up so that it goes right to the center of the top line, and you'll see all four quadrants kind of pop up with that with those yellow guidelines. That's what you want. And then we'll go back to our layer and go to the second layer that we created, select our arrow move tool, and then we're going to drag this layer down. And we want to drag it down right where the yellow guidelines kind of cross to create four quadrants again. And then what you'll see is that there is some additional space created again, and this is what we're going to fill to create our final repeat. So now what we want to do is select a new layer, and this time since we're working with the center space, we'll likely utilize the vertical symmetry tool so that whatever we put on one side will pop up on the other. So let's create a new layer by going into our layers options, hitting the plus icon, and then let's go to our wrench icon. Let's turn on our drawing guide. Let's select Edit Drawing Guide. And then we're going to select Symmetry and then go into our options, and we want to select Vertical Guides and then make sure Assisted Drawing is on and then select Done. And then we can begin to fill in this last space here. And I don't want to color this in. I just want it to be a really simple kind of black and white style print that I'm creating. And I just want to fill in the white space, making sure I'm not touching the edges. Once I'm done with that, I can tap on that layer and I can turn off Drawing Assist. And then I can select all three of these layers by clicking on the first, dragging right to select the next ones, and then select Group. And then I'm going to rename this group Final Original. So select where it says New Group, hit Rename. I'm going to name this Final Block, and then hit OK. And then I'm going to copy this by dragging left, selecting Duplicate, and then I'm going to click on the window and I'm going to select Flatten. What I want to do is duplicate this flattened version 3 more times so that we have 4 total. And then we can begin to test out the repeat. So selecting our first square here, go into our arrow move tool, make sure snapping is still on, magnetics is still selected, and we're just basically going to resize this down to 1/4 of its size so that we can fill in each quadrant. So I'm going to drag this and pull it to the right, and so that it's in the upper right quadrant. I'm going to go to my next one, select it, select my move arrow tool, drag my corners in, and I'm going to pull it to the upper left quadrant. And then I'm going to go to my third layer, select my move tool, and then I'm going to resize it down to the lower left quadrant, and you see it snaps right into size. And if you're noticing anything looks kind of funky, just make sure all of your blocks are turned off besides these 4 layers. And then we'll go to our final layer, select our move option here, our move tool, and then I'm going to drag it and resize this down so that it fills my lower right hand quadrant. And then you'll see our final repeat. And then I can hit done. You can really use this to create all kinds of shapes. It doesn't have to be abstract like what this is. This symmetry tool to, just make your work process a little bit easier. But this is the final effect. What you want to do then is export this. This wouldn't be your final export. This is your test. So what we would want to do is turn this off and then turn on our final block. And this block is what the export is going to be. So the point of the test is just to see what it looks like in its full form. So if you're going to upload to something like SPOONFLOWER, what you would want to do is go into your wrench icon, select share. You can make sure the background color is the color that you want it to be, do all of those final touches, and then you can export it as a JPEG or a PNG. And then save it somewhere on your iPad, whether you save it to image or you can save it to your files. I like to save them to my files and then hit save. And then you would upload that tile piece to something like SPOONFLOWER or Pattern Bank. Whereas if you're doing something that's print on demand, you should probably resize it to the requirements of the print on demand site. And then in that case, you would likely utilize something like this full print in the size that you would want it to be. Like say you're making curtains or a bedspread or something like that. You want to keep in mind the size that's needed, but also keep in mind the limitations of Procreate and the iPad. If you're going to do something quite large, you're better off working on the computer and using a software like Affinity Designer or Affinity Photo to create your final repeat that you would then upload to the print on demand site, or if you're an Adobe user. Okay, so that is it for today. That is how you utilize the mirror tool to create a repeat and a simple way to actually build out your repeat pattern in Procreate. I hope you enjoyed this week's tutorial, and I hope you found the process helpful and that it inspired you to get creative this week as you're working through some of your pattern concepts or ideas right on your iPad. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoy videos like this, please definitely make sure you subscribe to my channel. It helps to grow and it helps to create this beautiful creative community. And if you like this video in particular, make sure you give it a like. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.